This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. Today I was jonesing for a little horror, and I'm not interested in a Child's Play reboot because I don't think Child's Play needed a reboot, and Don Mancini, who is the director of many of the sequels, as well as the writer, I believe, of all of them, including the original, is not involved with this reboot. That doesn't interest me. Don Mancini is still producing Child's Play. I believe there's going to be a television show he's going to work on. That they decide to cut him out of the movie leaves a bad taste in my mouth. So I'm not entirely interested in that. And Midsummer isn't out yet. So what I decided instead was to take a look at a movie I saw on Redbox called The Nightmare Gallery. And it starts promisingly enough, as you can see from the clip. Though the thing is, it tries to be evocative of Lovecraft, but never quite works. And that's a pity. At times the movie feels like it has elements of John Carpenter's At the Mouth of Madness, but it never quite commits. And not a lot actually happens in this movie. It's aiming for being mind-bending, but it just comes off a bit hokey, unfortunately. It's not terrible by any stretch, but for a movie that evokes Lovecraft so cleverly, as I showed in that scene, for it to just be kind of gobbledygookish is a pity. It revolves around this professor whose graduate student vanishes having obtained this book they've both been searching for a long time. And the movie essentially revolves around this professor's search for her grad student. As I said, it's not a terrible movie, and I like the idea how the professor, who's a lesbian and has a wife, that's not the central point of the movie, and it's not even promoted necessarily. It's just that she does. And I like that because I think too much emphasis is oftentimes put on a person's sexuality, as opposed to just treating them as people and going on with whatever the story revolves around. So her lesbianism doesn't really play a role in the narrative. And in fact, you could take that out and the movie would still kind of work. So it's not a bad thing at all, how it was handled. What isn't particularly good, though, is that I mentioned earlier that it tries to have a Lovecraftian feel to it, but doesn't really succeed. It's too scattershot, and it just feels more directionless than anything else. Another interesting thing about the movie is its color palette. It's very muted. It's not black and white, but it's very muted, and colors don't pop, and there's no vibrancy to anything. That is obviously a creative decision, but it does the movie a disservice. It reminds me, when I do videos, I always do color correction. I don't make a lot of changes, but I try to have, for instance, skin tones look like skin tones, and to have them pop a little bit, and have, for instance, my own skin color has hints of red in it. So I try to make sure when I do my color correction that that's still the case. So I tend to go up on saturation. And this movie had none of that. It was just kind of desaturated quite deliberately, as I said. And it just kind of makes you wonder why. As I said earlier, it was clearly a creative decision, but to what end? The desaturated color doesn't lend anything to the narrative, and it's just an odd decision to make, because I honestly think if the colors popped more, the movie would have been more visually interesting. As it stands, it's just kind of dull looking. I don't know if this was shot on digital or 35mm. I get the feeling it was shot digitally, but I don't know that for a fact. But it's just not a very good looking movie, which is a pity, because it's just one more hurdle in the way of your enjoying it. So if you're interested in renting a horror movie that's more of a mind fuck than anything else, I would rent Nightmare Gallery. It's not terrible, it's not great, it's not something you want to pay, I don't know, $5 to rent, but if you can get a deal, rent it for $2 or $3, it's worth seeing. It's about an hour and a half. It's not great by any stretch, but there are worse ways to spend your time. Or you could just rewatch John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, which has many similar themes, but is so well executed. This is Brian with screenfiles.com and review. Peace.